A few years ago, Angie lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with her 2 sons, Riley, who was 8, and Tanner, who was 10. She got one room, so the boys shared the other room with a bunk bed. And they always used to fight over who got the top bunk. Riley usually won. One night, Angie's putting her boys to bed, and she's reading them some stories, and she sees that they're falling asleep. So she gives them each a kiss on the head, and she quietly slips out of their room and goes to her room right next door and goes to bed. About an hour later, Riley screams bloody murder, and Angie jumps out of her bed, runs to the boys' room thinking Riley must have fallen off the top bunk. Sure enough, he is on the ground, head down, still screaming. And she tries to calm him down, asks if he's okay, thinking, I guess this is going to be a trip to the ER tonight. And he just looks at her and screams, get me out of here. So she picks him up and carries him across the hall to the bathroom, where she turns on the lights and starts checking him for injuries. Long story short, Riley's fine. Turns out he actually jumped from the top bunk and landed just fine. So Angie asks him, why did you do that? And he blurts out, to get away from the lady on the ceiling with the backwards head. Now, by this point, Tanner's woken up and he's so annoyed with Riley. And he's like, dude, it's fine. You're okay. There's nothing to be afraid of. So Angie finally manages to calm Riley down. But from that night forward, Riley refuses to sleep in his own bed and insists on sleeping with Angie in hers, which she was okay with. But she did try to convince him to go back to his own bed. Tanner even offered to give him the bottom bunk permanently. Riley wouldn't budge. So about a month goes by, and Tanner's still sleeping on the top bunk in the boys' room. And one night, he wakes everybody up by jumping off the top bunk, running into Angie's room, and climbing into bed with Angie and Riley. And Angie says, honey, what's up? But Tanner refuses to talk about it. Now, he had just spent some time with his slightly older cousin that day. So Angie's thinking, well, maybe the boys watched some movies that they shouldn't have been watching, and Tanner's just had a nightmare. So she kind of pats him on the back, rubs his back a little bit, says, it's all right, you're safe, don't worry about it. And they all go back to sleep. So now, all 3 of them are sleeping in Angie's bed every night. And she does her best to get them to go back to their beds. She even buys them cool tents that go over the top and flashlights and comics. And the boys love this stuff, and they'll hang out in their room and enjoy it, but only during the day. And both the boys love animals. So she even goes so far as to buy them 2 mice with a big cage, thinking that if there's some other living creature in the room, that would give them some sense of comfort. But even that didn't work. And one day, Tanner finally tells Angie that he saw a shadow moving on the ceiling that he thought was a woman with long black hair. He said he was woken up by a flashing white light, and he thought it was Riley turning his flashlight on and on again. But when he looked closer, it was coming from the closet. And then he looked up and he saw the woman on the ceiling, and he just noped it out of there. Now Angie's like, great. I have 2 kids who are afraid of a monster in the closet. And she talked to her ex and to some other parents, and they all tried to reassure the boys that it's okay, that there's no such thing as monsters. And she and her ex were actually almost to the point of taking the boys to see a therapist because they thought, well, maybe there's some other psychological issue going on. So a few nights later, it's like 3 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and everybody's asleep in Angie's bed. Tanner's in the middle. Riley's on the far side next to the window, and Angie's on the side that's closest to the door. Now, normally the door would be closed, but this particular night it was open because they had all just had an epic Nerf gun fight before bed. It was awesome. So Angie's in bed snoring away when she suddenly wakes up. So she opens her eyes, and as she's trying to focus, she sees a white flashing light reflecting on the wall outside of her room. And she thinks it must be one of the boys' flashlights losing its batteries or something. And she debates on whether she actually wants to get out of bed to go turn it off or whether she should just roll over and ignore it. When she sees the source of the light is slowly moving down the hallway, getting closer to her room. Well, she immediately thinks there's an intruder. So she very quietly gets out of bed, gets closer to the door, so she can maybe kind of see if she can see what's going on out there or hear anything. And she peeks out into the hallway and she sees that the light is flashing near the ground coming from the boys' room. And she doesn't hear anything, no footsteps, nothing. So she quietly tiptoes out into the hallway and looks into the boys' room, and the light stops. And she starts freaking out, so she flips on the light switch and nothing. Mice are chilling, nothing out of place, and she looks all over the floor for the source of the light and finds nothing. Well, they ended up moving out a couple of months later and into a place where each of the boys got their own room, and the boys were not afraid to be in their own rooms anymore. And Tanner is now 15 years old. So a couple of months ago, Angie told him the story of her getting up at night to look for the light. And Tanner turns white as a ghost and just looks at her. And Angie's like, Tanner, what's the matter? And Tanner looks her dead in the eye and says, you're lucky you didn't look up.